I stayed late at the office that Thursday evening, not because I had to, but because going home meant facing the growing silence between Caleb and me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as I reviewed closing documents for the Henderson property, a multi-million-dollar estate in Buckhead that had taken months to navigate through probate. My assistant Maya had flagged several items for my review before she left at 6, and I was methodically working through each red tab section when something caught my eye. The property reference number on page 12 looked familiar. Not just familiar, identical to a screenshot I'd glimpsed on Caleb's phone 3 weeks ago when he was showing me inspiration photos for his next project. I remembered rolling my eyes at the time, thinking my architect husband was getting carried away with his Pinterest boards again. But this wasn't Pinterest. This was a legitimate property listing with an active purchase contract. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I opened my laptop and pulled up the MLS database, typing in the address, 3247 Crestline Drive, Atlanta, Georgia 30,327. The listing populated immediately, a stunning contemporary home with floor-to-ceiling windows, clean lines, and the kind of open-concept design that Caleb had been obsessing over for the past year. Listed at $8 million, currently under contract, closing scheduled for next month. My coffee grew cold as I stared at the screen. The buyer's information was partially redacted for privacy, but I could see enough to make my stomach drop. The purchasing entity was listed as C. Monroe Holdings LLC. Caleb's middle name was Charles. He'd incorporated under that name before. I sat back in my leather chair, feeling the weight of realization settle over me like a heavy blanket. My husband was buying a house he'd never mentioned to me, a house that cost more than our current home's market value, a house that would require financing we'd never discussed. I reached for my phone to call him, then stopped. Something held me back, maybe the lawyer in me, trained to gather all the facts before making accusations. Maybe the wife in me, terrified of what those facts might reveal. Instead, I did what I did best. I investigated. Our law firm maintained relationships with every major title company in Atlanta. I made 3 phone calls, each to a different contact, each framed as a routine inquiry about closing procedures. By the 3rd call, I had confirmation. The financing for 3247 Crestline Drive was being processed through Atlantic Federal Bank, with a co-signer application that had been submitted 2 weeks ago. I wasn't listed as a co-signer. For a married couple in Georgia, purchasing real estate without spousal consent required either a pre-existing separate property agreement or divorce proceedings. My hands moved across the keyboard before my mind could fully process what I was searching for. The Georgia Superior Court database was accessible to attorneys 24/7. I entered our names: Monroe, Caleb Charles vs. Monroe, Naomi Wells. The case file populated immediately. Filed 6 days ago. Petition for divorce citing irreconcilable differences. Temporary restraining order requested on joint assets. Court date scheduled for 3 weeks from now. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. 12 years of marriage ended with a filing I'd never seen, in a case I'd never been served. Either Caleb's attorney was playing fast and loose with service requirements, or I scrolled down to the service information. Papers had been served to Naomi W. Monroe at my office address, received and signed for by the front desk on Monday morning while I was in depositions all day. Maya handled mail when I was out. Maya, who'd been out sick with flu this entire week. I walked to the front desk and found Monday's mail log. There it was in Maya's careful handwriting. Legal documents Monroe v. Monroe filed in N. Wells. Office inbox. My office inbox, where I kept client correspondence, court filings, and documents requiring my immediate attention. The same inbox that had been overflowing when I returned from depositions Monday evening, causing me to grab everything and shove it into my urgent review folder without sorting. The same folder I'd been meaning to organize all week. I walked back to my office and pulled out the thick manila folder. Third document from the bottom, a cream-colored envelope with the return address for Hartman and Associates, Family Law. The envelope I'd assumed was related to the Henderson estate given the similar high-quality paper stock. I opened it with steady hands, though my heart was racing. The petition was thorough, professionally drafted, and devastating. Caleb wasn't just asking for a divorce, he was asking for an equitable division of assets, temporary spousal support, and exclusive use of our shared vehicles and residence pending the court's final determination. He was asking for half of everything I'd built, including my premarital inheritance that had funded his failed design firm 3 years ago. I read every word twice, then placed the documents carefully on my desk. The fluorescent lights seemed brighter now, casting sharp shadows across the legal text that was systematically dismantling my life. My phone buzzed. A text from Caleb. Working late again? Don't wait up. Big presentation tomorrow. I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, good luck with the presentation. I'll be working late too. I deleted the message and retyped, me too. See you tomorrow. Then I deleted that and simply typed, okay. I needed to call someone. I needed advice, support, someone to help me process what I'd just discovered. But it was past 11 p.m., and the magnitude of the betrayal felt too large to dump on anyone. Without warning, instead, I did what felt most natural. I started working. I pulled up the property records for 3247 Crestline Drive and began tracing the ownership history. The house had been on the market for months, initially listed at $3.2 million before dropping to its current price. The listing agent was Miles Jordan, someone I recognized from charity events, polished, discreet, the kind of realtor who specialized in high-end properties and wealthy clients who valued privacy. I cross-referenced the property's recent showing history against our credit card statements. 3 visits in the past month, each on days when Caleb claimed to be meeting with potential clients or visiting project sites. Each visit lasting exactly 2 hours, according to the showing logs. Each visit with a companion listed as S. Brooks, Sierra Brooks. The name hit me like a physical blow. Sierra had been my intern 2 years ago, a bright design student from Georgia Tech who'd impressed me with her attention to detail and genuine enthusiasm for sustainable architecture. I'd mentored her for 6 months, written her recommendation letters, even invited her to a few industry events where she could network with established professionals. Sierra, who was 24 years old, ambitious, and exactly the kind of fresh-faced energy that could make a middle-aged man feel young again. Sierra, who had sent me a thank you card just last Christmas, thanking me for changing her life and hoping we could stay in touch as her career developed. I leaned back in my chair and laughed. Actually laughed out loud in my empty office. Because the alternative was screaming or crying or both. My husband was buying a house with my former intern, financing it through a divorce I hadn't known about, and somehow I'd discovered it all through a simple clerical error. Mai's flu had probably saved me from walking into divorce court completely unprepared. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Leona's number. Leona Graves had been my best friend since college, my maid of honor, and currently one of Atlanta's most respected financial advisors. If anyone could help me navigate this disaster, it was Leona. The phone rang 4 times before her groggy voice answered. Naomi, what's wrong? It's almost midnight. Leona, I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. I need your help. How quickly can you set up a shell company? There was a pause, then the sound of Leona sitting up in bed. How quickly do you need it? I looked at the divorce papers spread across my desk, then at the property listing still glowing on my laptop screen. Tomorrow morning. And Leona, it needs to be bulletproof, completely untraceable back to me. Jesus, Naomi, what has that bastard done? Now? I smiled for the first time in hours. He made a mistake, a big one, and I'm going to make sure he pays for it. I'll pick you up at 7 a.m., Leona said. We'll get coffee and you can tell me everything. Then we'll destroy him. After I hung up, I sat in my office for another hour, reading through the divorce petition one more time and making notes in the margins. Caleb had been thorough, but he'd also been arrogant. He'd assumed I wouldn't fight back, wouldn't challenge his narrative, wouldn't have the resources or the will to protect myself. He'd forgotten that I was a real estate attorney. He'd forgotten that I understood contracts, shell companies, and asset protection better than he understood architectural blueprints. Most importantly, he'd forgotten that I still had access to the inheritance he'd never been able to touch, the trust fund my grandmother had established specifically to protect family assets from gold-digging spouses and bad business decisions. Grandmother had been remarkably prescient, I gathered the divorce papers and locked them in my office safe, then closed the property listing and shut down my laptop. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of buying 3247 Crestline Drive out from under my cheating husband. Tonight, I would go home and pretend I still believed in our marriage for just a little while longer. As I drove through the empty Atlanta streets, I found myself thinking about Sierra, about how excited she'd been during her internship, how she'd hung on every word of advice I'd given her about building a career in a male-dominated field, how she'd talked about wanting to find a mentor who could show her how to balance ambition with integrity. I wondered if she knew about the divorce papers. I wondered if she knew that the man she was building dreams with was financing those dreams with lies and legal maneuvering. I wondered if she cared. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had my answer. It didn't matter if Sierra knew or cared. What mattered was that Caleb had underestimated me, and I was going to use that mistake to reclaim everything he thought he could take. The house was dark when I entered, but I could hear the soft sound of Caleb's breathing from our bedroom upstairs. I stood in our kitchen, looking around at the granite countertops I'd selected, the custom cabinets I'd paid for, the breakfast nook where we'd shared thousands of morning coffees over 12 years of marriage. Tomorrow, I would start building something new, something that belonged entirely to me, something Caleb would never be able to take away. Leona was waiting in my driveway at exactly 7 a.m., engine running, 2 cups of coffee in her cup holders, and a manila folder thick with documents on her passenger seat. She'd clearly been up most of the night. Her usually perfect auburn hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she was wearing yoga pants and an old Georgia Tech sweatshirt, her crisis management uniform. "Get in," she said as I approached her black BMW. "We have a lot to cover before 9. I slid into the passenger seat and accepted the coffee gratefully. "Tell me you worked miracles." "Better." She handed me the folder. "I worked within the legal system, which is much more satisfying in the long run. Elias Properties LLC was incorporated in Delaware at 3 a.m. this morning. The registered agent is a law firm I've used before, completely legitimate, completely discreet. The beneficial ownership is buried under 3 layers of holding companies, and the funding source is listed as private investment capital." I opened the folder and scanned the incorporation documents. Everything looked perfect. "Elias Properties? Your grandmother's maiden name was Elias, right? I figured if anyone deserves to have their legacy protected, it's the woman who set up that untouchable trust fund." Leona pulled out of my driveway and headed toward downtown. "Speaking of which, I need you to sign authorization forms to transfer funds from the trust to Elias Properties." "How much liquid capital are we talking about?" $4.7 million. I'd checked the trust balance at 5 a.m., unable to sleep after my discovery. More than enough to buy the house outright and cover all associated costs. Leona whistled softly. "Your grandmother really didn't trust men, did she? She lived through the Depression and 2 bad marriages. She understood that financial independence was the only real security." I signed the authorization forms with steady hands. "She'd approve of what we're doing." "Good, because I already have a meeting set up with Miles Jordan at 10:30. I called his emergency line at 6 a.m. and told him I represented a client with immediate cash liquidity who was interested in making a competitive offer on Crestline Drive. I looked at her with admiration. "How did you know Miles was the listing agent?" "Because I did my homework." She handed me another folder. "This one labeled with Caleb's name. While you were processing the emotional shock last night, I was processing the financial reality. Your husband has been very busy, Naomi, and very stupid." The folder contained bank statements, credit card records, and what appeared to be private investigator reports. I stared at the top document, which showed multiple cash withdrawals from our joint account over the past 3 months, each for amounts just under the reporting threshold. "How did you get these?" "I have a contact at your bank. Someone who's seen too many women get financially screwed in divorces and occasionally bends privacy rules when lives are at stake." Leona's voice was grim. "Keep reading." The pattern became clear as I flipped through the statements. Caleb had been systematically draining our joint accounts while making minimal contributions. The cash withdrawals corresponded with dates when he claimed to be working late or meeting with clients. But more damning were the credit card charges. Expensive dinners for 2 at restaurants we'd never been to together. Hotel rooms booked during times when he claimed to be visiting project sites. Jewelry purchases from stores I'd never heard of. "There's more," Leona said, turning onto Peachtree Street. The private investigator report. I found the PI report buried beneath the financial documents. 3 pages of surveillance notes, timestamps, and photographs. My hands trembled slightly as I looked at the first photo, Caleb and Sierra entering an upscale restaurant in Midtown, her hand on his arm, both of them laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. The timestamp showed it was taken on our wedding anniversary, the night Caleb claimed he had food poisoning and couldn't make our dinner reservation. How long have you known? I asked quietly. I suspected for months. The way he talked about you at the charity gala in February, like you were some kind of burden, instead of the woman who'd supported his career for over a decade. But I didn't have proof until yesterday. She glanced at me with concern. Are you okay? I studied the rest of the photographs methodically, treating them like evidence in a case rather than documentation of my marriage's destruction. Caleb and Sierra at the house, walking through rooms with the eager expressions of people planning a future together. Caleb and Sierra at a furniture showroom, pointing at dining room sets and bedroom suites. Caleb and Sierra at a jewelry store looking at engagement rings. I'm angry, I said finally, but I'm also relieved. Now I know exactly what I'm dealing with. The last page of the report contained the most useful information, a detailed timeline of their relationship. The affair had started for months ago. Shortly after, Sierra had reached out to thank me for my mentorship and ask if I knew of any opportunities for someone with her background. I remembered forwarding her inquiry to several contacts, including Caleb, who claimed he might have some freelance design work available. Apparently, he'd found work for her all right. She's been to the house 6 times in the past month, I said, reading the surveillance notes. Always with Caleb. They've met with the real estate agent, a mortgage broker, and what appears to be an interior designer. They're not just buying a house, Leonu observed. They're planning a whole life together, which makes this even more satisfying. We pulled into the parking garage beneath Miles Jordan's office building. I gathered the folders and checked my appearance in the visor mirror. I looked composed, professional, ready for business. Nothing in my expression suggested that my world had imploded 12 hours ago. One more thing, Leona said as we walked toward the elevator. I did some research on Sierra Brooks. She's not just young and naive. She's ambitious, image-driven, and heavily in debt from graduate school. Her Instagram account is full of luxury lifestyle posts that don't match her student income. She's dating your husband for his money and status, not his sparkling personality. You think she knows about the divorce filing? Oh, she knows. The timeline matches to perfectly. Caleb files for divorce, immediately starts house hunting with his girlfriend, and she starts posting about exciting new chapters and dreams coming true. She's not an innocent victim here, Naomi. She's a willing participant. The elevator opened onto the 15th floor, revealing a sleek reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Atlanta. Miles Jordan's office was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive furniture, carefully curated art, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about success. Miles himself was equally polished. Mid-50s, silver hair, perfectly tailored suit, and the kind of warm smile that probably closed million-dollar deals on a regular basis. He rose from his desk as we entered, extending his hand with practiced charm. Miss Graves, I presume? Thank you for reaching out this morning. I have to admit, I was surprised to hear from a potential buyer so early, but in this market, timing is everything. Mr. Jordan, thank you for accommodating us on short notice. This is my client, whom I mentioned, prefers to maintain privacy during the initial stages of any transaction. I shook his hand firmly, noting the slight confusion in his eyes as he tried to place me. We'd met briefly at charity events, but never in a professional context. Of course, discretion is paramount in my business. Please, have a seat. I understand. You're interested in the Crestline Drive property? That's correct, Leona said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. My client has specific requirements for this type of investment, and the Crestline property appears to meet all criteria. Miles opened a folder on his desk. It's a stunning property, contemporary design, premium finishes, situated on 2 acres with complete privacy. The current owners are motivated sellers relocated for work and need to close quickly. I understand there's already an offer pending. I spoke for the first time, keeping my voice neutral and professional. There is, but Miles hesitated, and I could see him weighing client confidentiality against the prospect of a potentially better offer. The current buyer is having some financing challenges. Nothing insurmountable, but it's caused some delays. Financing challenges. I almost smiled. Caleb was probably discovering that purchasing a multi-million-dollar home while going through a divorce wasn't as straightforward as he'd assumed. My client would be prepared to make a cash offer, Leona said smoothly, significantly above asking price, with a shortened due diligence period and flexible closing date. Miles's eyes widened slightly. Cash offer? That would certainly simplify things. May I ask what price range we're discussing? 3.2 million, I said without hesitation. Contingent on a satisfactory inspection and clear title, closing within 30 days. That's for 100,000 above asking price. My client values certainty over negotiation, Leona explained. Time is more important than money in this situation. Miles was quiet for a moment, clearly doing calculations. In his head, a cash offer at that price would generate a substantial commission and eliminate the financing risks that were apparently complicating Caleb's purchase. I would need to contact the sellers immediately, he said finally. And of course, I have an ethical obligation to inform the current buyer that a competing offer has been received. Of course, I agreed. We understand that you need to follow proper procedures. How quickly could we expect a response from the sellers? Given the terms you're proposing, I would expect to hear back within 24 hours, possibly sooner. Miles was already reaching for his phone. I should mention that the current buyer has been quite invested in this property. He's visited multiple times, brought his companion to see it, even consulted with contractors about potential modifications. His companion? Leona asked innocently. A young woman, design student, I believe. They seem quite serious about the property. It's going to be disappointing news. I kept my expression neutral, but inside I felt a surge of satisfaction. Caleb was about to learn that his carefully laid plans could be disrupted by someone with better resources and faster execution. We understand this may cause some disappointment, I said, but business is business. The best offer should win. Miles nodded. Absolutely. In fact, I have to say, your timing is fortuitous. The current buyer was supposed to finalize his financing this week, but there have been complications. Something about his legal status affecting his loan approval. Legal status. The divorce filing was already impacting Caleb's ability to secure financing. He'd probably discovered that lying to mortgage brokers about pending divorce proceedings was considered fraud. Will you need additional documentation from us? Leona asked. Proof of funds will be sufficient for now. If the sellers accept your offer, we'll need standard purchase agreements and inspection schedules. Miles was already pulling forms from his desk drawer. I have to ask, have either of you viewed the property? I'd be happy to arrange a showing. That won't be necessary, I said. I'm familiar with the architectural style and the neighborhood. We're confident in our offer. What I didn't mention was that I'd driven past the house 3 times in the past month, each time wondering why Caleb was suddenly so interested in contemporary design when our own home was traditional, colonial. Now I knew he'd been planning his future with Sierra, choosing a style that reflected her taste rather than ours. Miles walked us to the elevator, promising to call with updates as soon as he heard from the sellers. As the elevator doors closed, Leona turned to me with a grin. 3.2 million. You're not messing around. I want this to be decisive. No room for counter offers or negotiations. When Caleb finds out he's lost that house, I want it to be completely final. My phone buzzed with a text message. Caleb, hope you slept well. I'll be working late again tonight. Client dinner. I showed the message to Leona, who rolled her eyes. Client dinner with Sierra, no doubt. What are you going to do? I typed back. No problem. I have plans tonight too. Which was true. I was planning to research every aspect of Sierra Brooks's life, from her academic record to her social media presence to her family background. If she wanted to play games with my marriage, she was going to discover that I played to win. The elevator opened onto the parking garage, and we walked toward Leona's car in comfortable silence. I felt calmer than I had in months, maybe years. For the first time since discovering Caleb's betrayal, I had a clear plan and the resources to execute it. What's next? Leona asked as we got in the car. I looked at my phone, calculating timing and logistics. Next, we wait for Miles to call with good news. Then we start preparing for the real battle, which is making sure That when Caleb realizes what I've done, it's too late for him to do anything about it. Miles Jordan called at 2:47 p.m., just as I was finishing a client consultation about a commercial lease dispute. His voice carried the excitement of someone who'd just closed a significant deal. "The sellers accepted your offer," he said without preamble. "Full asking price of 3.2 million cash, 30-day closing." They were thrilled with the terms. I felt a surge of satisfaction mixed with something darker, the anticipation of watching Caleb's carefully constructed plans crumble. "Excellent. When can we begin the paperwork?" "I can have everything ready by tomorrow morning." "There is one complication, though." Miles paused, and I could hear papers shuffling on his desk. "The other buyer, Mr. Monroe, he's not taking the news well." "Oh?" "He called 3 times in the past hour, first demanding to know who made the competing offer, then threatening to sue for tortious interference, then offering to match your price." I had to explain that the sellers had already accepted your terms, and that backing out now would expose them to liability. I allowed myself a small smile. Caleb was panicking, which meant he'd probably already told Sierra about losing their dream house. I wondered how she was handling the news that her carefully planned future was evaporating. Did he indicate whether he plans to take any legal action? He mentioned consulting with his attorney, but frankly, he doesn't have grounds for a lawsuit. This was a legitimate competitive offer situation. The sellers chose the better terms. Miles cleared his throat. "I do have to ask, is there any personal connection between your client and Mr. Monroe?" The level of his reaction seems excessive for a standard real estate transaction. I considered how to answer. Miles was smart enough to eventually piece together the connection, especially once the divorce proceedings became public record. But for now, maintaining the illusion of separation was crucial. "My client prefers to keep personal and business matters separate," I said carefully. "I'm sure Mr. Monroe will find another suitable property." After hanging up, I immediately called Leona. "It's done. The house is ours." "Officially?" "As official as it gets with a signed purchase agreement. Miles is preparing all the paperwork for tomorrow." I leaned back in my office chair, feeling the first real moment of triumph since this nightmare began. Caleb is apparently having what Miles diplomatically called an excessive reaction. Good. Let him panic. The more emotional he gets, the more mistakes he'll make. Leona's voice carried grim satisfaction. "Speaking of mistakes, I have an update on the Sierra situation." "What did you find?" "Remember how I said she was ambitious and image-driven? It goes deeper than that. She's been building a social media presence around her relationship with Caleb, posting about exclusive property tours and designing her dream home, and grateful for mentors who open doors. She's been using your husband to build her personal brand." I felt a cold anger settle in my chest. "She's been posting about the house?" "Extensively. Photos of herself in the kitchen, talking about future dinner parties. Pictures of the master suite with captions about waking up to this view every morning. She's even posted videos of herself discussing design modifications with contractors." Leona paused. "Naomi." She tagged the location. "Anyone following her account knows exactly which house she was planning to live in." "How many followers does she have?" 12,000. A mix of design students, local Atlanta professionals, and what appears to be a growing number of architecture and interior design industry contacts. She's been marketing herself as the girlfriend of a successful architect, living a luxury lifestyle that's completely fake. I opened my laptop and pulled up Instagram, searching for Sierra's account. Her profile photo showed her in designer clothes I knew she couldn't afford, standing in front of what appeared to be Caleb's office building. Her bio read, "Interior design graduate student, Atlanta, living my best life, dreams to come true." I scrolled through her recent posts, each one more infuriating than the last. Photos of expensive dinners with captions about celebrating success. Pictures of jewelry that I now knew Caleb had purchased with money from our joint accounts. Videos of her touring luxury homes with commentary about finding the perfect space to build a life. Then I found the post that made my hands clench into fists. A photo of Sierra in the kitchen of 3247 Crestline Drive, arms outstretched, enormous smile on her face. The caption read, "Sometimes the universe aligns perfectly and all your dreams come together in one beautiful moment. Can't wait to make this house a home with my amazing partner." Some people say you can't have it all, but I'm proof that with the right person by your side, anything is possible. Hashtag dreams come true, hashtag new beginnings, hashtag grateful, hashtag living my best life. The post had 847 likes and 156 comments, including several from people I recognized in the Atlanta design community. She really thought she was going to get away with this, I murmured, screenshotting the post for my files. The best part is that she posted that yesterday, 12 hours before we bought the house out from under her. Leona's voice carried savage satisfaction. I wonder what she's going to tell her followers now. I continued scrolling and found my answer. Posted 20 minutes ago, a black and white selfie of Sierra looking dramatically pensive, with the caption, "Sometimes life throws you curveballs that test your resilience. Grateful for the lessons learned and excited for new opportunities ahead. Everything happens for a reason. Hashtag stay strong. Hashtag new chapter. Hashtag blessed." She's already trying to spin this as some kind of philosophical growth experience, I told Leona. Of course she is. She can't admit that her sugar daddy got outmaneuvered by his wife. Bad for the brand. I closed Instagram and returned to Miles's email with the preliminary paperwork. The purchase agreement was straightforward, standard. Terms clear. Title transfer, professional inspection scheduled for next week. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. My phone rang. Caleb's number. I stared at it for 3 rings, then answered with my most professional voice. Naomi Wells. Naomi. His voice was strained, and I could hear traffic in the background. He was probably calling from his car, maybe even sitting outside Miles's office. Are you busy? I need to talk to you about something. I'm always busy, Caleb. What's so urgent? It's about a property I was looking at, an investment opportunity. There was some kind of mix-up with another buyer, and I lost the deal. I'm wondering if you might know anything about competitive bidding situations, legal obligations, that sort of thing. I almost laughed at his transparent attempt to get information. Property law isn't really my specialty, but generally speaking, sellers are free to accept the best offer. What kind of mix-up are you talking about? Someone made a cash offer way above asking price. The whole thing happened incredibly fast, like they knew exactly what they were doing. His voice carried frustration and something else, suspicion. The timing was almost too convenient. Real estate moves quickly when serious buyers are involved. Cash offers always have an advantage over financing contingencies. I kept my voice neutral, giving him textbook advice that revealed nothing. Did your agent explain the process to you? Miles Jordan. And yes, he explained it. But Naomi, this property it was important to me. I'd been working on this deal for months. I'm sorry you lost the house, Caleb. But if someone else made a better offer, that's just how the market works. I paused, letting silence stretch between us. Why didn't you mention you were looking at investment properties? I thought we agreed to discuss major financial decisions together. Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear him calculating how much to reveal. It was preliminary. I wanted to have all the details worked out before bringing it to you. That doesn't sound like an investment property, Caleb. It sounds like you were planning to buy a house without telling your wife. Naomi, I have to go. Client meeting. I hung up before he could respond. Immediately, my phone buzzed with a text. We need to talk tonight. This is important. I didn't respond. Instead, I called Leona back. Caleb just tried to fish for information about the house purchase. He's suspicious but doesn't have any concrete evidence yet. What did you tell him? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. General advice about real estate transactions. Nothing that could be traced back to our involvement. I pulled up my calendar, checking my schedule for the rest of the week. How quickly can we move to closing? With a cash purchase and motivated sellers, 2 weeks, maybe less if we expedite the inspection and title search. Do it. I want this transaction locked down before Caleb figures out what happened. Consider it done. I'll call Miles and push for the fastest possible timeline. Leona paused. Are you going to tell Caleb tonight? I thought about it for a moment. The smart move would be to maintain the charade until closing, keeping Caleb unaware of my knowledge about both the house and the divorce filing. But part of me wanted to see his face when he realized he'd been outmaneuvered. Not yet. Let him sweat for a few more days. Maybe he'll make more mistakes. Speaking of mistakes, I have one more update on Sierra. She deleted the post about the house. When? About an hour after. Caleb would have told her they lost the deal. But she didn't delete it fast enough. I grabbed screenshots and several people in the comments section were asking questions about what happened. What kind of questions? The usual social media drama. People wanting to know why she was posting about a house she apparently can't afford, whether the whole relationship was fake, that sort of thing. She's losing followers. I felt a petty satisfaction at Sierra's social media humiliation, but it was overshadowed by something larger. Tomorrow, I would own the house where Caleb had planned to start his new life. The house where Sierra had posed for photos, planning dinner parties, and dreaming about waking up every morning with my husband. Instead, I would be the one holding the deed, the one making decisions about renovations and modifications, the one controlling a piece of real estate that represented everything Caleb thought he could take from me. Leona, I said, looking out my office window at the Atlanta skyline. Change of plans. I don't want to sell this house after the divorce is final. What do you want to do with it? I smiled, feeling a sense of purpose crystallize in my mind. I want to turn it into something that actually matters. Something that helps other women who've been betrayed and blindsided like I was. A nonprofit? Legal aid office, specifically for women navigating high-asset divorces with manipulative spouses. I could see it clearly now, the open concept. Living areas converted to meeting spaces, the master suite transformed into private consultation rooms, the kitchen becoming a place where women could sit with coffee and learn about their rights. Caleb wanted to build his future in that house. Instead, I'm going to use it to protect other women's futures. Leona was quiet for a moment, then laughed with genuine admiration. Naomi Wells, you are absolutely ruthless. I love it. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time since discovering Caleb's betrayal, I felt genuinely excited about something. Not just angry or determined or grimly satisfied, but actually excited about the possibilities ahead. Caleb had tried to steal my future. Instead, he'd given me the motivation to build something better than anything I'd ever imagined. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The first sign that Caleb was unraveling came at 6:23 a.m. on Friday morning. I was in my home office, reviewing contracts with my coffee, when I heard his voice through the thin walls, loud, agitated, and completely unlike his usual controlled tone. Miles, this is Caleb Monroe calling for the fourth time. I need you to call me back immediately. This situation with the Crestline property is unacceptable, and I'm prepared to take legal action if necessary. You have a professional obligation to your clients, and I question whether you've fulfilled that obligation in this case. I quietly moved closer to the wall separating our offices. Caleb had converted the spare bedroom into his workspace 2 years ago, claiming he needed a dedicated area for client calls and design work. Now I realized it had probably been where he'd planned his affair and orchestrated our divorce. His voice continued, getting progressively more agitated. I don't care what your legal department says. Someone with inside information manipulated this transaction, and I'm going to find out who. The timing was too convenient, the offer too specific. This wasn't random market competition. I smiled grimly. Caleb's paranoia was working in my favor. The more convinced he became that someone was deliberately sabotaging him, the more erratic his behavior would become. And erratic behavior led to mistakes. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Is this Naomi Wells? This is Jasper Monroe, Caleb's brother. Can we talk? It's important. I stared at the message for a long moment. Jasper was Caleb's younger brother by 3 years, an environmental engineer who'd always seemed uncomfortable with Caleb's lifestyle and treatment of others. We'd had limited interaction over the years, family gatherings, holiday dinners, but he'd always been polite and seemed genuinely interested in my work. I typed back, "What about my brother's behavior? I think you should know what's really going on." My heart rate increased. Did Jasper know about the affair? The divorce filing? The house? I made a quick decision. Coffee? 1 hour? Starbucks. On Peachtree and 14th. See you there. I grabbed my keys and headed out, telling Caleb through his office door that I had an early client meeting. His muffled response suggested he was still on the phone, probably leaving more increasingly desperate messages for Miles Jordan. Jasper was already seated in a corner booth when I arrived, nursing what appeared to be his second cup of coffee. He looked tired, conflicted, and decidedly uncomfortable. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, the look of someone who'd been wrestling with a difficult decision. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure you'd come. You said it was important." He nodded, then seemed to struggle with where to begin. "Naomi, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you and Caleb having problems?" I studied his face carefully. "Why do you ask?" "Because my brother has been acting like a crazy person for the past week. He's calling me at all hours, ranting about business conspiracies and people trying to destroy his life. Yesterday he showed up at my apartment at midnight, demanding that I loan him money for some kind of emergency situation." Jasper leaned forward. "And because 3 weeks ago, I saw him at a restaurant with a woman who definitely wasn't you." There it was. Jasper knew about Sierra. "What did you do when you saw them?" "Nothing. I left before he could see me." He looked ashamed. "I told myself it might be business, that maybe I misunderstood what I was seeing, but the way they were together, it wasn't business. I made a decision." Jasper had always struck me as fundamentally decent, and if he was reaching out, it meant his conscience was bothering him. That could be useful. "We're getting divorced," I said simply. "Caleb filed papers without telling me. I found out by accident." Jasper's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, then something that looked like resignation. "Jesus, Naomi, I'm so sorry. How long have you known?" "A few days. Long enough to start protecting myself legally and financially." "Is that why he's been so paranoid? He keeps talking about people working against him, undermining his business deals." I chose my words carefully. "Caleb has made some assumptions about how this divorce will proceed. He may be discovering that those assumptions were incorrect." Jasper was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. "The woman I saw him with, young, blonde, very put together. Is she the reason for the divorce?" "Her name is Sierra Brooks. She was my intern 2 years ago." I let that sink in. "They've been planning to buy a house together." "The house he's been obsessing over? The one where someone outbid him?" Jasper's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Oh, my God, Naomi. I didn't do anything illegal or unethical," I said firmly. "But I also didn't just sit back and let him steal my future to build his." Jasper leaned back in his seat, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he looked almost relieved. "Good for you. Honestly, good for you. Caleb has always thought he was smarter than everyone else, that he could manipulate situations to his advantage. It's about time someone outmaneuvered him." "You don't seem surprised by any of this." "I'm not really." Now I realized it had probably been where he'd planned his affair and orchestrated our divorce. His voice continued, getting progressively more agitated. "I don't care what your legal department says. Someone with inside information manipulated this transaction, and I'm going to find out who." The timing was too convenient, the offer too specific. This wasn't random market competition. I smiled grimly. Caleb's paranoia was working in my favor. The more convinced he became that someone was deliberately sabotaging him, the more erratic his behavior would become. And erratic behavior led to mistakes. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Is this Naomi Wells?" "This is Jasper Monroe, Caleb's brother. Can we talk? It's important." I stared at the message for a long moment. Jasper was Caleb's younger brother by 3 years, an environmental engineer who'd always seemed uncomfortable with Caleb's lifestyle and treatment of others. We'd had limited interaction over the years, family gatherings, holiday dinners, but he'd always been polite and seemed genuinely interested in my work. I typed back, "What about my brother's behavior? I think you should know what's really going on." My heart rate increased. Did Jasper know about the affair? The divorce filing? The house? I made a quick decision. Coffee? 1 hour? Starbucks. On Peachtree and 14th. See you there. I grabbed my keys and headed out, telling Caleb through his office door that I had an early client meeting. His muffled response suggested he was still on the phone, probably leaving more increasingly desperate messages for Miles Jordan. Jasper was already seated in a corner booth when I arrived, nursing what appeared to be his second cup of coffee. He looked tired, conflicted, and decidedly uncomfortable. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, wrinkled shirt, unshaven face, the look of someone who'd been wrestling with a difficult decision. "Thank you for meeting me," he said as I sat down. "I wasn't sure you'd come. You said it was important." He nodded, then seemed to struggle with where to begin. "Naomi, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be honest with me. Are you and Caleb having problems? I studied his face carefully. Why do you ask? Because my brother has been acting like a crazy person for the past week. He's calling me at all hours, ranting about business conspiracies and people trying to destroy his life. Yesterday, he showed up at my apartment at midnight, demanding that I loan him money for some kind of emergency situation. Jasper leaned forward. And because 3 weeks ago, I saw him at a restaurant with a woman who definitely wasn't you. There it was. Jasper knew about Sierra. What did you do when you saw them? Nothing. I left before he could see me. He looked ashamed. I told myself it might be business, that maybe I misunderstood what I was seeing, but the way they were together, it wasn't business. I made a decision. Jasper had always struck me as fundamentally decent, and if he was reaching out, it meant his conscience was bothering him. That could be useful. We're getting divorced, I said simply. Caleb filed papers without telling me. I found out by accident. Jasper's face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, then something that looked like resignation. Jesus, Naomi, I'm so sorry. How long have you known? A few days. Long enough to start protecting myself legally and financially. Is that why he's been so paranoid? He keeps talking about people working against him, undermining his business deals. I chose my words carefully. Caleb has made some assumptions about how this divorce will proceed. He may be discovering that those assumptions were incorrect. Jasper was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. The woman I saw him with, young, blonde, very put together. Is she the reason for the divorce? Her name is Sierra Brooks. She was my intern 2 years ago. I let that sink in. They've been planning to buy a house together. The house he's been obsessing over? The one where someone outbid him. Jasper's eyes widened as understanding dawned. Oh, my God, Naomi. I didn't do anything illegal or unethical, I said firmly. But I also didn't just sit back and let him steal my future to build his. Jasper leaned back in his seat, and for the first time since I'd arrived, he looked almost relieved. Good for you. Honestly, good for you. Caleb has always thought he was smarter than everyone else, that he could manipulate situations to his advantage. It's about time someone outmaneuvered him. You don't seem surprised by any of this. I'm not really. It's time to accelerate the timeline. How quickly can we close on the house? I was just about to call you with good news. The inspection is scheduled for Monday, title search is clear, and the sellers are eager to close as soon as possible. We could have everything finalized by the end of next week. Perfect. And Leona, it's time to prepare for the next phase. Caleb is starting to suspect something. And when he figures out what we've done, he's going to come at us with everything. He has. Are you ready for that? I looked at my house, the house where I'd spent 12 years building a life with someone who'd been planning to destroy it, and felt a calm certainty settle over me. I've been ready my whole life. The closing on 3247 Crestline Drive took place on a Tuesday morning at a.m. in the sterile conference room of American Title Company. I sat at one end of the long mahogany table, flanked by Leona and my attorney, while the sellers, a relocated corporate executive, and his wife occupied the opposite end with their representation. Miles Jordan sat in the middle, professionally neutral despite the chaos that had surrounded this transaction for the past 2 weeks. The wire transfer had been completed at 9:47 a.m. As of 10:23 a.m., when I signed the final document in a stack of papers 3 inches thick, I officially owned the house where my husband had planned to start his new life with his young girlfriend. Congratulations, said the title officer, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, who had no idea she was facilitating one of the most satisfying moments of my life. The property is now officially yours. I shook hands with the sellers, thanked Miles for his professionalism, and walked out of the building with the deed to Caleb's dream house in my briefcase. Leona was grinning so widely I thought her face might crack. How does it feel to be a homeowner again? She asked, as we stood on the sidewalk outside the title company. It feels like justice, I replied, pulling out my phone to check for messages. 3 missed calls from Caleb, all within the past hour. And it feels like it's time for the next phase. I had been planning this moment for 2 weeks, ever since Jasper had started providing regular updates on Caleb's increasingly erratic behavior. According to his brother, Caleb had been obsessively researching the mysterious buyer of his house, making increasingly desperate calls to real estate contacts, and spiraling into paranoid theories about business competitors and professional Sabotage. The beauty of my plan was its simplicity. I wasn't going to confront Caleb directly or spring some dramatic revelation. Instead, I was going to let him discover the truth naturally, in a way that would make his own assumptions and paranoia work against him. Are you ready for this? Leona asked as we got into her car. I've been ready since the day I found those divorce papers. We drove to our favorite lunch spot, a quiet bistro in Virginia Highland, where we'd celebrated every major milestone in our friendship for the past 15 years. As we settled into our usual corner booth, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if some cosmic balance had been restored. So what's the timeline now? Leona asked, studying the menu, despite the fact that we'd both ordered the same thing. Every time we'd eaten here. Tonight, I'm going to mention casually that I spent the morning at a property closing. Nothing dramatic, just everyday conversation. Then I'm going to let Caleb's own paranoia do the rest. And if he asks for details, I'll be appropriately vague. Just enough information to make him suspicious, not enough to confirm anything. I smiled, imagining Caleb's face when the pieces started falling into place. He's already convinced that someone is working against him. When he realizes that someone might be me, it's going to destroy him. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasper. See, having lunch with us at that Italian place on Piedmont. Looks tense. She keeps checking her phone and he looks like he's barely holding it together. I showed the message to Leona, who snorted with amusement. Trouble in paradise? Sierra's probably starting to realize that dating a man going through a contentious divorce isn't as glamorous as she thought, especially when that man is becoming increasingly unstable and can't deliver on his promises. We ordered our usual grilled salmon for me, chicken Caesar for Leona, and spent the meal discussing practical matters. The house inspection had revealed minor issues that were already being addressed. The title was clear, and all utility transfers would be completed by the end of the week. From a legal standpoint, the transaction was flawless. Have you thought about when you want to start the renovations? Leona asked as we finished lunch. Not until after the divorce is finalized. I don't want to give Caleb's attorneys any ammunition about wasting marital assets or vindictive spending. I stirred my coffee thoughtfully, but I've already been sketching out plans for converting the space into offices and meeting rooms. The nonprofit legal aid idea? Exactly. The master suite will make perfect private consultation rooms. The open living area can accommodate group sessions or educational workshops, and that gorgeous kitchen can be a place where women feel comfortable and safe while they're learning about their options. Leona reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Your grandmother would be proud. I hope so. She always said that the best revenge was building something better than what you lost. We parted ways outside the restaurant, and I drove home with a sense of anticipation that felt almost electric. Tonight, I would begin the final phase of my plan, not through dramatic confrontation or angry accusations, but through the quiet, methodical destruction of Caleb's assumptions about his own cleverness. The house was empty when I arrived, but Caleb's car pulled into the driveway just as I was finishing my review of the closing documents in my office. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, the sound of his office door closing, and then the familiar pattern of frustrated phone calls that had become his daily routine. At 6:30, I started preparing dinner. Nothing elaborate, just pasta with marinara sauce and a simple salad. The kind of meal we'd shared thousands of times during our marriage, back when we'd actually talked to each other about our days. Caleb emerged from his office at 7:15, looking haggard and distracted. His usually perfect hair was disheveled. His expensive shirt was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. Smells good, he said, attempting the kind of casual domesticity that had once been natural between us. Just pasta. I figured we could both use something simple tonight. I set 2 plates on the kitchen table and poured wine for both of us. How was your day? Frustrating. Still dealing with the fallout from that property situation. He sat down heavily, looking older than his 42 years. I'm starting to think someone deliberately sabotaged that deal. Really? That seems like a serious accusation. The timing was too perfect, Naomi. Someone knew exactly what offer to make and exactly when to make it. Either it was incredible luck, or someone had inside information. I twirled pasta around my fork carefully, keeping my expression neutral. What kind of inside information? Details about my financing timeline, my offer amount, maybe even personal information about why the property was important to me. His voice carried an edge of paranoia that would have been concerning if I'd still cared about his mental health. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out who would have access to that kind of information. Have you considered that maybe it was just business? High-end real estate is competitive. Cash buyers always have an advantage. It was a cash offer, 3.2 million, no financing contingencies, 30-day closing. Exactly the kind of offer that would eliminate any possibility of competition. I took a sip of wine to hide my smile. Sounds like someone who really wanted that property. But why? That's what I can't figure out. Why would someone pay $400,000 over asking price for a house they'd never even seen? It doesn't make financial sense unless. He stopped, his fork halfway to his mouth, and stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Unless what? Unless it wasn't about the house at all. Unless it was about preventing me from buying it. I met his gaze steadily. That would be a very expensive way to make a point. Not if you had the money to spare. Not if you wanted to send a message. His voice was getting louder, more agitated. Naomi, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Of course. Do you know anything about the sale of 3247 Crestline Drive? I considered my answer carefully. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the point where I could either maintain the charade or begin revealing the truth. I decided on something in between. I know it's a beautiful property in an excellent neighborhood. Contemporary design, premium finishes, very private setting. I paused, watching his face. I also know it recently sold to a cash buyer for significantly over asking price. How do you know those details? I had a closing this morning for a different property, and the real estate agent mentioned it in passing. Apparently it was quite the talk of the office record sale price for that neighborhood. Caleb's face went pale. What real estate agent? Miles Jordan. You know Miles, don't you? I think you've mentioned him before. You had a closing with Miles Jordan this morning? Not with him directly. He was just there for another transaction. I took another bite of pasta, as if this conversation were no more significant than discussing the weather. Why? Do you know him professionally? Naomi. Caleb's voice was very quiet now, and when I looked up, his eyes had a wild, desperate quality that was both satisfying and slightly frightening. What property did you close on this morning? An investment property. Nothing that would interest you. What property? I set down my fork and looked at him directly. Why are you asking? Because I think you know exactly why I'm asking. We stared at each other across the kitchen table that had been the site of so many ordinary marital conversations, and I felt the weight of 12 years of history hanging between us. All the shared meals, the discussions of future plans, the casual intimacy of daily life, all of it had been leading to this moment. Caleb, I said softly, I think we need to have a conversation about honesty in our marriage. What's that supposed to mean? It means that I know about Sierra. I know about the divorce papers you filed without telling me. I know about the house you were planning to buy with money from our joint accounts. I paused, letting each revelation land like a physical blow. And I know that as of this morning, you're never going to live in that house. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the background. Caleb's face went through a series of expressions: shock, understanding, rage, and finally something that looked like grudging respect. You bought the house. I bought the house. With what money? Money that was never yours to begin with. Money you couldn't touch, couldn't claim, couldn't steal in a divorce settlement. I smiled for the first time since the conversation began. My grandmother's trust fund. The one you always resented because it meant I had something that belonged only to me. Caleb leaned back in his chair, and for a moment he looked almost impressed. You magnificent bitch. Careful, Caleb. I'm still your wife. At least until the divorce you filed without telling me is finalized. How long have you known? Long enough to protect myself. Long enough to make sure that when this marriage ends, I don't lose everything I've built while you start a new life with my former intern. He was quiet for several minutes, staring at his untouched dinner and processing the full scope of what had happened. When he finally looked up, his expression was a mixture of fury and admiration. What happens now? I stood up and began clearing the dishes, as if this were just another ordinary evening in our ordinary marriage. Now you call Sierra and explain why the dream house isn't going to work out. Now you find a new place to live. And now we proceed with the divorce on my terms instead of yours. And the house? The house becomes something useful. Something that actually helps people instead of just feeding your ego. Caleb laughed. A harsh sound with no humor in it. You've thought of everything, haven't you? I've had good teachers. You've shown me exactly how cruel and calculating a person can be when they want something badly enough. I paused at the kitchen sink, looking back at him. The difference is that I'm using those skills to protect people instead of destroy them. This isn't over, Naomi. Yes, it is. You just don't realize it yet. I filed my own divorce petition at 8:47 a.m. on Thursday morning, exactly 48 hours after Caleb discovered that I owned his dream house. My attorney, Rebecca Chen, had worked through the night to prepare documentation that was both comprehensive and devastating, a legal document that laid out 12 years of financial manipulation, emotional neglect, and systematic deception. With the precision of a surgical instrument. This is some of the most thorough preliminary work I've ever seen, Rebecca said, as we walked up the steps of the Fulton County Superior Court. She was a small woman with steel gray hair and a reputation for eviscerating unprepared opposing counsel. Your financial forensics alone could teach a graduate course in asset tracing. I had excellent help, I replied, thinking of Leona's meticulous documentation of every suspicious transaction, every hidden account, every lie that Caleb had told about our finances over the past 2 years. The courthouse was busy with the usual mix of attorneys, plaintiffs, and nervous-looking people clutching manila folders filled with the paper remains of their failed relationships. I felt oddly calm as we approached the filing window, as if I were handling someone else's legal matter rather than formally ending my own marriage. Wells vs. Monroe, Rebecca told the clerk, sliding our petition across the counter. Original. Filing with motion for expedited hearing based on financial misconduct. The clerk, a tired-looking woman who'd probably seen thousands of divorces, stamped our documents with practiced efficiency. Motion for expedited hearing will be reviewed by the presiding judge. You should hear back within 5 business days. Thank you. I accepted the stamped copies, noting the case number that would define the legal end of my marriage, 24 CVO 1-847. As we walked back toward the parking garage, Rebecca's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID and smiled grimly. Franklin and Associates. Caleb's attorneys, no doubt wondering why their client's wife just filed a competing petition. Let it go to voicemail. Let them wonder. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? I considered the question as we got into Rebecca's car. I'm enjoying having control again. For the first time in months, I'm making decisions instead of reacting to Caleb's deceptions. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasper. Emergency. See, showed up at my office an hour ago, completely unhinged. Can you meet? I showed the message to Rebecca, who raised an eyebrow. Your brother-in-law? The only decent member of the Monroe family. He's been keeping me informed about Caleb's mental state. That could be useful for establishing a pattern of erratic behavior. Do you want to reschedule our strategy meeting? No. Let's meet with Jasper together. If Caleb is having some kind of breakdown, Rebecca should hear about it firsthand. We arranged to meet Jasper at a coffee shop near his engineering firm's office in Buckhead. He was already there when we arrived, pacing near the entrance like a caged animal. His usually composed demeanor was completely shattered. His hands were shaking, his face was flushed, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. Thank God you came, he said, as we approached. Naomi, my brother has completely lost his mind. I think he might be dangerous. Rebecca and I exchanged glances. Dangerous how? She asked, pulling out a legal pad. He came to my office this morning, demanding that I help him destroy you. He said you'd declared war on him and that he was going to take you down no matter what it cost. Jasper ran his hands through his hair. He was talking about hiring private investigators, challenging the house purchase in court, even going after your law practice. What exactly did he say about the law practice? Rebecca's pen was moving quickly across her notepad. That he was going to find evidence of professional misconduct, client conflicts, anything that could get you disbarred. He said he'd spent 12 years watching you work, and he knew where all the bodies were buried. I felt a chill of concern. Caleb had been present during countless conversations about my cases over the years. While attorney-client privilege protected most of what he'd overheard, his knowledge of my practice could still be weaponized if he was desperate enough. Did he mention any specific cases or clients? The Henderson estate. He kept talking about how you'd used inside information from that case to manipulate the real estate market. Jasper looked confused. I don't understand what he meant, but he seemed convinced it was some kind of smoking gun. Rebecca and I looked at each other. The Henderson estate was the probate case that had led me to discover the Crestline Drive property listing in the first place. If Caleb was building a narrative around that connection, it suggested he was trying to construct a legal theory for challenging the house purchase. What else did he say? He asked me to loan him $100,000 to finance the war effort. When I refused, he started screaming that the whole family had turned against him, that everyone was conspiring to destroy his life. Jasper's voice was shaking. Naomi, I've never seen him like this. He was completely out of control. Did he make any specific threats against Naomi? Rebecca asked. Not physical threats, but he said he was going to make her pay for every day of humiliation she'd caused him. He talked about exposing her financial manipulation, her criminal conspiracy with her friends, her abuse of legal privileges. Jasper paused. And he said he was going to make sure Sierra got half of everything in the divorce settlement. Sierra isn't his wife, I pointed out. She has no legal claim to marital assets. I tried to tell him that, but he wasn't listening to logic. He's convinced that if he can prove you acted maliciously in buying the house, he can get the transaction reversed and claim damages. Rebecca made more notes, then looked up with the expression I'd learned to recognize, the look of a lawyer who'd just identified a strategic advantage. This is actually excellent news, she said. If Caleb is making threats, acting erratically, and talking about spending significant money on revenge rather than reasonable settlement negotiations, it establishes exactly the kind of pattern we want on record. How so? Judges hate vindictive behavior in divorce proceedings. If we can demonstrate that Caleb is more interested in hurting you than in reaching a fair resolution, it works strongly in our favor. Rebecca tapped her pen against her notepad. Plus, if he's planning to waste marital assets on private investigators and frivolous legal challenges, we can ask the court to freeze his access to joint funds. The strategic possibilities were intriguing, but I was more concerned about the immediate implications of Caleb's breakdown. Jasper, do you think he might do something stupid? Try to confront me directly, or go after my clients? I honestly don't know. He was talking like someone who's convinced he's fighting for his life. People in that mindset can be unpredictable. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Leona's number. I need to give Leona a heads up. If Caleb is planning to investigate my finances, he might try to go after her too. Leona answered on the second ring. Please tell me you're calling with good news about filing the petition. The petition is filed, but we have a new problem. Caleb is apparently planning some kind of legal counterattack. Rebecca thinks it could work in our favor, but you should probably be prepared for scrutiny of the shell company structure. Let him scrutinize all he wants. Everything we did was completely legal and properly documented. If anything, an investigation. We'll just highlight how carefully we protected your assets while he was bleeding money on his girlfriend. After hanging up, I turned back to Jasper and Rebecca. What's our next move? We wait for the court to respond to our motion for expedited hearing, Rebecca said. In the meantime, I'm going to file a motion to freeze Caleb's access to joint accounts based on his stated intention to waste marital assets on vindictive litigation. And I'm going to document everything Caleb says and does, Jasper added. If he's going to have a public breakdown, we might as well have it on record. Be careful, I warned him. If Caleb realizes you're reporting back to me, it could put you in danger. I'm more worried about what he might do to you. Promise me you'll be careful, Naomi. Don't go anywhere alone, don't meet with him without witnesses, and don't underestimate how far he might go. As we left the coffee shop, Rebecca pulled me aside. Jasper is right to be concerned. I've seen divorces turn ugly before, but there's something particularly vindictive about Caleb's behavior. You should consider getting a security system for your house and maybe even a restraining order. You think he'd try to hurt me physically? I think he's a man who's lost control of a situation he thought he was manipulating, and that makes him unpredictable. Better to be overly cautious than sorry. That evening, I worked late at the office, partly to catch up on client matters and partly to avoid going home to the house I still technically shared with my increasingly unstable husband. At 9:30 p.m., my assistant Maya knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." I looked up from the contract I was reviewing, immediately alert. "Who is it?" "A young woman named Sierra Brooks. She says you know her." I felt my pulse quicken. Sierra was here, in my office, at 9:30 at night. This couldn't be a coincidence. "Send her in." Sierra entered my office looking nothing like the confident, polished young woman from her Instagram posts. Her hair was disheveled, her makeup was smeared, and she was wearing jeans and an oversized sweater that made her look even younger than her 24 years. She clutched a small purse in both hands like it was an anchor. "Miss Wells, thank you for seeing me. I know it's late, and I know this is awkward, but I didn't know where else to go." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Please, sit down." "What can I do for you?" Sierra sat down carefully, as if she were afraid the chair might collapse. "I need to tell you something about Caleb, about what he's planning to do." "I'm listening." "He's completely lost his mind since you bought the house. He's been calling me constantly, showing up at my apartment, talking about revenge and making you pay." Tears started forming in her eyes. "Miss Wells, I think he's going to try to hurt you." I studied her face carefully, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. All I saw was a young woman who was genuinely frightened. "What exactly has he said?" "That he's going to destroy your career, your reputation, everything you've built. He's been researching your clients, your cases, looking for anything he can use against you." Sierra wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "He said he knows things about your practice that could ruin you. And you're telling me this because I never wanted any of this to happen. When Caleb and I started seeing each other, I thought I was dating a successful architect who was unhappily married. I didn't know he was planning to file for divorce behind your back. I didn't know he was lying about his finances. I didn't know he was using me to hurt you." Sierra's voice broke completely, and for the first time since this entire situation began, I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. She was young, ambitious, and had been manipulated by someone much more experienced in deception. "Sierra, I need you to be very specific about Caleb's threats. What exactly is he planning to do?" She took a shaky breath and began to talk, and, with every word, I realized that my war with Caleb was just beginning. Sierra's warning proved to be just the beginning. Over the next week, Caleb's campaign of retaliation unfolded with the methodical precision of a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. What he didn't anticipate was that his very desperation would become the instrument of his own destruction. The first shot was fired on Monday morning when Rebecca called me at 7:30 a.m., her usually composed voice tight with anger. "They're challenging the house purchase," she said without preamble. "Franklin and Associates filed a motion claiming fraudulent conveyance, conspiracy to hide marital assets, and abuse of legal privilege." I was in my kitchen, coffee mug halfway to my lips, when the call came. Through the thin walls, I could hear Caleb on a conference call in his office, his voice animated in a way I hadn't heard in months. He was energized by the fight, feeding off the conflict like a man who'd finally found his purpose. "What are they claiming specifically?" "That you used confidential information from the Henderson estate case to identify and purchase the Crestline property before Caleb could complete his transaction. They're alleging that this constitutes professional misconduct and grounds for reversing the sale." I felt a moment of cold fear. The connection between the Henderson case and my discovery of the property was real, even if it wasn't what Caleb's attorneys were suggesting. Do they have any evidence? Nothing credible. They're relying on timeline correlations and speculation. But Naomi, they've also filed complaints with the state bar alleging conflict of interest and misuse of client information. Jesus, it gets worse. They've subpoenaed Leona's financial records, demanding documentation of the shell company formation and funding sources. And they've sent investigation requests to 3 of your major clients, fishing for anything that might suggest professional impropriety. I set down my coffee cup with hands that were steadier than I felt. "How long do we have to respond?" 14 days for the fraudulent conveyance motion, 30 days for the bar complaints. "But Naomi, there's something else." They've also filed for emergency relief, asking the court to freeze your assets pending investigation of the allegedly fraudulent transfer. The kitchen suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in around me. "If the court froze my assets, I would lose access to the trust fund that had given me independence. I would be exactly where Caleb wanted me, financially vulnerable and legally defensive. What are our chances of stopping the emergency relief? Good, if we can demonstrate that Caleb's motions are frivolous and retaliatory, which is where Sierra's information becomes crucial. I had spent Saturday afternoon with Sierra and Rebecca, documenting every threat, every manipulative conversation, every detail of Caleb's increasingly unhinged behavior. What emerged was a picture of a man whose primary motivation wasn't justice or even money, it was punishment. Have you heard anything from the court about our expedited hearing motion? Judge Clarissa Hayes has agreed to hear our case next Thursday. I've reviewed her previous decisions, and she has a reputation for being particularly unsympathetic to vindictive behavior in divorce proceedings. After hanging up with Rebecca, I sat in my kitchen for several minutes, listening to Caleb's voice through the wall as he continued his conference call. I caught fragments of conversation references to financial manipulation, criminal behavior, and complete destruction of her credibility. He was talking about me like I was a business competitor to be eliminated rather than the woman he'd promised to love and honor 12 years ago. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasper. You need to see this. She posted something on LinkedIn that's getting a lot of attention. I opened LinkedIn and searched for Caleb's profile. The post, published an hour ago, was a masterpiece of professional, passive aggression disguised as entrepreneurial wisdom. After 12 years of marriage, I'm learning that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones most capable of betrayal. When personal relationships become contaminated by greed and legal manipulation, it affects not just families but entire professional communities. I'm grateful for the support of colleagues who understand that integrity in business requires integrity. In life, sometimes the most difficult journey leads to the most important discoveries about character. #integrity, #professional ethics, #new beginnings. The post had already garnered 43 likes and 17 comments, mostly from Atlanta architecture and design professionals expressing support and curiosity. Several people had asked directly what had happened, and Caleb was responding with carefully crafted replies that implied professional misconduct without making specific accusations. I screenshotted the post and forwarded it to Rebecca with a message, evidence of public campaign to damage my professional reputation. Her response was immediate, perfect. This demonstrates malicious intent and contradicts his claims that the legal challenges are about justice rather than revenge. By Wednesday morning, 3 more pieces of Caleb's strategy had become clear. First, he was systematically contacting my professional contacts, not with direct accusations but with subtle suggestions that they might want to be careful about their associations with me. Second, he had hired a private investigator who was following me, photographing my meetings with clients and attempting to interview people in my professional network. Third, he was using Sierra's knowledge of my mentorship relationships to approach other young professionals I had helped, trying to find evidence of inappropriate favoritism or quid pro quo arrangements. The strategy was sophisticated, systematic, and completely toxic. It was also exactly the kind of behavior that would backfire spectacularly in front of a judge who valued professional ethics. He's making this too easy, Rebecca observed as we reviewed the growing pile of evidence documenting Caleb's campaign. Every move he makes demonstrates that this isn't about legitimate legal concerns, it's about destroying you personally and professionally. We were meeting in my office Wednesday evening, preparing for Thursday's court hearing. Rebecca had compiled a binder of evidence that told a devastating story, financial records showing Caleb's systematic depletion of joint accounts, surveillance reports documenting his affair with Sierra, screenshots of his social media campaign, and witness statements from Jasper and Sierra about his threats and erratic behavior. The question is whether Judge Hayes will see through his legal maneuvering to the vindictive behavior underneath, I said, flipping through the documentation. She will. Hayes has presided over hundreds of high-asset divorces, and she's developed a reputation for being able to distinguish between legitimate legal concerns and expensive revenge fantasies. Rebecca closed her own copy of the binder. Plus, we have something Caleb doesn't expect, which is, Sierra is going to testify on your behalf. I looked up sharply. She agreed to that? This afternoon. She's realized that Caleb's campaign isn't just targeting you, it's targeting anyone associated with you, including her. He's been pressuring her to make false statements about your mentorship relationship, suggesting that you abused your position to help her inappropriately. What kind of false statements? That you gave her confidential client information, that you pressured her for personal favors in exchange for professional help, that you used your influence to damage competitors. Rebecca's expression was grim. When she refused to cooperate, he threatened to destroy her career prospects in Atlanta. So she's not testifying out of conscience. She's testifying out of self-preservation. Does it matter? Her testimony will be truthful, and it will demonstrate the extent of Caleb's manipulation and intimidation tactics. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Atlanta weather that made everything feel slightly ominous. I dressed carefully for court, a navy blue suit that projected competence without arrogance, minimal jewelry, hair pulled back in a professional chignon. I wanted to look like someone who belonged in a courtroom, not someone who was desperately defending herself against wild accusations. The Fulton County Superior Court was busy with the usual mix of criminal arraignments, civil motions, and family court proceedings. Rebecca and I found seats in the gallery of Judge Hayes's courtroom and waited for our case to be called. Judge Clarissa Hayes was exactly what I had expected from Rebecca's description, a woman in her early 60s with silver hair, sharp eyes, and the kind of authoritative presence that suggested she had seen every possible variation of human behavior and was impressed by none of it. She reviewed cases with efficiency that bordered on brusqueness, but I noticed that she listened carefully to every argument and asked precise questions that went straight to the heart of each legal issue. Wells versus Monroe, the bailiff called. At 10:47 a.m., Rebecca and I took our places at the plaintiff's table while Caleb and his attorney, a silver-haired man named David Franklin, occupied the defendant's side. It was the first time I had seen Caleb since our kitchen confrontation the previous week, and the change in his appearance was startling. He had lost weight, his expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, and there was a manic energy in his movements that suggested he was running on caffeine and desperation. This matter involves cross petitions for divorce and emergency motions regarding alleged fraudulent asset transfers. Judge Hayes began, consulting the file in front of her. Mr. Franklin, your client filed the original petition and subsequent emergency motions. Please proceed. David Franklin was exactly the kind of attorney I had expected: polished, expensive, and practiced at making weak arguments sound reasonable. He spent 20 minutes laying out Caleb's version of events, a successful architect betrayed by a manipulative wife who used her legal expertise and professional connections to steal his dream home and destroy his business relationships. Your Honor, this case represents a disturbing abuse of legal privilege and professional access, Franklin argued. Mrs. Monroe used confidential information obtained through her legal practice to identify and purchase property that her husband had been negotiating to buy. She then orchestrated a campaign of financial manipulation designed to prevent him from completing legitimate business transactions. Judge Hayes listened without expression, occasionally making notes but never interrupting. When Franklin finished, she turned to Rebecca. Miss Chen, your response? Rebecca stood and began systematically dismantling every aspect of Caleb's argument. She presented the timeline of the affair, the evidence of systematic financial deception, the documentation of threats and intimidation tactics. She walked the judge through bank records, social media posts, witness statements, and private investigator reports, building a case that was both comprehensive and devastating. Your Honor, Mr. Monroe's emergency motions are not about protecting legitimate legal interests, Rebecca concluded. They are about punishing his wife for refusing to be a victim of his deception and manipulation. The evidence demonstrates a pattern of vindictive behavior that began long before Mrs. Wells discovered his infidelity and secret divorce filing. I'd like to hear from the parties directly, Judge Hayes said. Mr. Monroe, please approach the witness stand. What happened next was exactly what I had hoped for and exactly what Caleb should have feared. Under Judge Hayes's methodical questioning, his careful facade began to crumble, revealing the angry, entitled man underneath. When she asked about his financial management during the marriage, he became defensive. When she asked about his relationship with Sierra, he became evasive. When she asked about his social media campaign and professional intimidation tactics, He became combative. Mr. Monroe, Judge Hayes said after 20 minutes of testimony that had revealed more than Caleb intended, do you believe it's appropriate to use social media to make veiled accusations about your wife's professional conduct? I have a right to speak truthfully about my experiences, Caleb replied, his voice rising slightly. And do you believe it's appropriate to hire private investigators to follow your wife and attempt to interfere with her professional relationships? I'm protecting my legitimate interests in this divorce proceeding. Judge Hayes made a note, then looked up with an expression that made me think Caleb was about to receive a very unpleasant surprise. Mrs. Wells, please approach the witness stand. Walking to the witness stand felt like stepping into a spotlight. That would illuminate not just the facts of my case, but the entire architecture of my marriage and its systematic destruction. Judge Hayes watched me with the kind of attention that suggested she was evaluating not just my words, but my character, my motivations, and my credibility as a witness in my own divorce. Mrs. Wells, she began, consulting her notes, I'd like you to walk me through the timeline of events that led to your purchase of the Crestline Drive property. Start with when you first became aware of your husband's interest in that particular house. I took a breath and began with the discovery that had changed everything: the property reference number in the Henderson estate files, the late night research, the growing realization that my husband was planning a life without me. Judge Hayes listened without interruption as I described finding the divorce papers, discovering the affair, and making the decision to protect myself rather than confront Caleb directly. At any point during this process, did you use confidential client information to gain an advantage in the property purchase? She asked. No, Your Honor. The Henderson estate case involved a completely different property. The only connection was that both properties were processed by the same title company, which is how I noticed the reference number in the first place. I paused, making sure my answer was complete. I purchased the Crestline property using my own premarital inheritance through a legitimate shell company structure that was properly documented and legally compliant. And what was your motivation for purchasing this particular property? This was the question I had been preparing for, the moment where I could either sound vindictive or justified. Initially, Your Honor, I was hurt and angry. I felt betrayed by my husband's deception and manipulated by his secret planning. But as I learned more about the extent of his financial dishonesty and the systematic way he had been preparing to leave our marriage, my motivation became more about self-protection than revenge. How so? Mr. Monroe had been draining our joint accounts, hiding his debts, and planning to claim half of my premarital inheritance in the divorce settlement. The house purchase was a way to demonstrate that I was capable of protecting my own interests and that I wouldn't be passive. In the face of his deception, Judge Hayes made notes, then looked up with an expression that was difficult to read. Mrs. Wells, your husband's attorney has suggested that your actions were calculated to cause him maximum emotional and financial harm. How do you respond to that characterization? I had practiced this answer with Rebecca, but sitting in the witness chair with Caleb's angry stare burning into me, I found myself speaking from the heart rather than from preparation. Your Honor, I was married to Caleb Monroe for 12 years. I supported his career when it was struggling. I paid off his debts when his business ventures failed, and I stood by him when he made professional mistakes that cost us both money and reputation. My voice was steady, but I could feel emotion underlying each word. In return, he lied to me about his financial management, carried on an affair with a woman I had mentored, and filed for divorce behind my back while planning to take half of everything I had inherited and earned. I paused, looking directly at Judge Hayes. If my actions caused him emotional and financial harm, it was because I refused to be a victim of his manipulation. I used legal methods to protect assets that were rightfully mine, and I made strategic decisions to ensure that when our marriage ended, it would be on fair terms rather than the terms he had planned without my knowledge. And what are your current intentions regarding the property? I plan to convert it into a legal aid office specifically focused on helping women navigate high-asset divorces. I want to create a resource for other women who find themselves in situations similar to mine where they need legal protection but may not have the resources or knowledge to defend themselves effectively. Judge Hayes's expression shifted slightly, and for the first time since the hearing began, I saw what might have been approval in her eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Wells. You may return to your seat. As I walked back to the plaintiff's table, I caught sight of Sierra sitting in the gallery. She looked nervous but determined, dressed in a conservative blue dress that made her appear older and more professional than her usual social media persona. Rebecca had spent hours preparing her for testimony, and I hoped she would be able to withstand what was certain to be aggressive cross-examination from Franklin. "The court calls Sierra Brooks," Judge Hayes announced. Sierra walked to the witness stand with careful steps, as if she were navigating a minefield. She was sworn in with a voice that was barely audible, and Judge Hayes had to ask her to speak louder when she confirmed her name and occupation. "Miss Brooks," Rebecca began, "how did you first meet Caleb Monroe?" "Through Naomi Wells. Miss Wells had been my mentor when I was an intern at her law firm 2 years ago. When I reached out to thank her for her help and ask about career opportunities, she forwarded my inquiry to several contacts, including Mr. Monroe." "And what was the nature of your initial professional relationship with Mr. Monroe?" "He hired me to do some freelance design work for his firm. Small projects at first, mood boards, material selections, that sort of thing." Sierra's voice was getting stronger as she found her rhythm. "Over time, the work became more substantial, and we began spending more time together." "When did your relationship become personal rather than professional?" Sierra glanced toward Caleb, then looked away quickly. "About 4 months ago. He told me that his marriage was over, that he and his wife were just going through the motions while they figured out how to separate their lives." "Did he mention that he was planning to file for divorce?" "He said they had discussed it and that it was inevitable. He made it sound like it was a mutual decision that was just a matter of timing and logistics." Rebecca walked Sierra through the timeline of their relationship, the house hunting expeditions, the planning for their future together. With each question, it became clearer that Sierra had been manipulated as thoroughly as I had, told lies that served Caleb's purposes while keeping her compliant and hopeful. "Miss Brooks, did Mr. Monroe ever ask you to make false statements about your relationship with Mrs. Wells?" "Yes." Sierra's voice was firm now, and she looked directly at Judge Hayes. "After Mrs. Wells bought the house, Caleb became desperate. He asked me to say that she had given me confidential client information, that she had pressured me for personal favors, that she had used her influence inappropriately." "And did you agree to make these false statements?" "No, everything Mrs. Wells did for me was appropriate and professional. She never asked for anything in return, never shared confidential information, never made me feel uncomfortable in any way." Sierra paused. "When I refused to lie about her, Caleb threatened to destroy my career prospects in Atlanta." Franklin's cross-examination of Sierra was brutal but ineffective. He tried to paint her as a scorned woman seeking revenge against Caleb, but Sierra's answers were consistent and credible. When he suggested that she was being coached by me to damage his client, Sierra responded with quiet dignity that she was testifying because someone needs to tell the truth about what really happened. After Sierra's testimony, Rebecca called Jasper to the stand. His testimony was devastating for Caleb, a detailed account of increasingly erratic behavior, unreasonable demands for money, and explicit threats against me. When Franklin tried to suggest that Jasper was biased against his own brother, Jasper's response was simple and powerful. "I love my brother, but I can't support what he's doing. This isn't about money or property. This is about Caleb's inability to accept that his actions have consequences." By the time the testimony concluded, Judge Hayes had heard 3 hours of evidence that painted a clear picture: a manipulative husband who had systematically deceived his wife, planned a secret divorce, and was now using the legal system to punish her for protecting herself. "I'm prepared to rule on the emergency motions," Judge Hayes announced after a brief recess. "Mr. Monroe's motion for asset freeze is denied. The evidence demonstrates that Mrs. Wells's purchase of the Crestline Drive property was made with premarital assets that were properly protected under existing trust structures. There is no credible evidence of fraudulent conveyance or conspiracy." I felt a wave of relief so intense it was almost physical. The asset freeze denial meant that my financial independence was secure, that I wouldn't be forced into a defensive position while fighting Caleb's vindictive legal challenges. Furthermore, Judge Hayes continued, "The court finds that Mr. Monroe's various legal challenges appear to be motivated by a desire for revenge rather than legitimate legal concerns. The evidence of social media campaigns, professional intimidation, and threats against witnesses suggests a pattern of behavior that is inconsistent with good faith divorce proceedings." Franklin was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, My client has legitimate concerns about Mr. Franklin. Your client's concerns would be more credible if they weren't accompanied by a systematic campaign to damage his wife's professional reputation and intimidate potential witnesses. Judge Hayes's tone was sharp. The court is particularly troubled by evidence that Mr. Monroe attempted to coerce Miss Brooks into making false statements. She consulted her notes, then looked up with an expression that made it clear she was delivering the final blow. The court hereby orders that all joint assets be frozen except for reasonable living expenses and legitimate legal fees. Mr. Monroe is enjoined from contacting Mrs. Wells's clients, colleagues, or professional associates for any purpose related to this divorce proceeding. He is further enjoined from making any public statements, including social media posts, that reference this case or make allegations about Mrs. Wells's professional conduct. Additionally, the court finds that Mr. Monroe's behavior raises serious concerns about his ability to participate in good faith settlement negotiations. Therefore, this matter will proceed to full trial on an expedited basis. Trial is set for 6 weeks from today. Judge Hayes gathered her papers and stood. This court is adjourned. As the judge exited, I turned to look at Caleb for the first time since my testimony. His face was pale, his hands were shaking, and he looked like a man who had just realized that his carefully constructed plan had not only failed but had made his situation significantly worse. Franklin was already whispering urgently in Caleb's ear, probably explaining that they had just lost every major battle and were now facing a trial where the evidence would be even more damaging. Sierra was being escorted out by courthouse security, a precaution Rebecca had requested given Caleb's increasingly unstable behavior. "How do you feel?" Rebecca asked as we gathered our materials. I thought about the question as we walked toward the courthouse exit. 6 hours ago, I had been worried about asset freezes and professional misconduct allegations. Now, I was walking out of court with my financial independence intact, my professional reputation protected, and a trial date that would give me 6 weeks to prepare the complete destruction of Caleb's legal position. I feel like I just won the first battle of a war I never wanted to fight, I said. But since Caleb insisted on starting it, I'm going to make sure I finish it. As we reached the courthouse steps, my phone buzzed with a text from Jasper. Caleb is on his way to the parking garage. He looks completely unhinged. Be careful. I looked around the busy courthouse plaza, suddenly aware that my victory might have made me a target rather than simply a winner. Caleb had lost everything he thought he could control, and desperate people were capable of desperate actions. "Rebecca," I said, "I think we need to talk about security measures." 3 weeks after the court hearing, I stood in the empty master bedroom of 3247 Crestline Drive, watching contractors take measurements for the renovations that would transform Caleb's dream house into something far more meaningful. The irony wasn't lost on me. The space where he had planned to wake up each morning with Sierra would become private consultation rooms where women could safely discuss the legal complexities of escaping their own manipulative marriages. "The structural modifications for the office suites will be completed by next month," said Elena Rodriguez, the project manager I'd hired to oversee the conversion. "We'll have 4 private consultation rooms, a group meeting space, and a reception area that still takes advantage of those gorgeous windows." I nodded, looking out at the view that had probably captivated both Caleb and Sierra. Rolling hills covered in Georgia pines, the kind of vista that made you believe in possibilities and fresh starts. Soon, other women would sit in these rooms, planning their own fresh starts with legal advice and emotional support. "What about the kitchen area?" "We're keeping it largely intact. Your idea about having a comfortable space where clients can have coffee while they're processing difficult information is brilliant. Sometimes the most important conversations happen when people feel safe and nurtured." My phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. "Settlement offer from Franklin's office. You need to see this. Can you meet in an hour?" I replied that I would be there, then spend another 30 minutes walking through the house, finalizing details with Elena and her team. Each room held echoes of conversations I'd never been part of. Caleb and Sierra planning their future, choosing paint colors, discussing furniture arrangements. Now those spaces would host different conversations entirely. Women learning about their legal rights, support groups for those navigating high-conflict divorces, educational workshops about financial protection. Rebecca's office was in a sleek downtown building with views of the Atlanta skyline. When I arrived, She was sitting behind her desk with a document in her hands and an expression that suggested I was either going to be very pleased or very surprised. "Caleb's attorney sent this over this morning," she said, sliding the papers across her desk. "It's a settlement proposal." I picked up the document and began reading. Within the first paragraph, I understood why Rebecca had looked so intrigued. This wasn't the aggressive, take everything approach that had characterized Caleb's previous legal strategy. This was something much more desperate and much more revealing. The proposal offered me an uncontested divorce with complete control of my premarital assets, including the Crestline Drive property. In exchange, Caleb would retain ownership of his architectural firm and receive a modest settlement from our joint accounts to cover his immediate living expenses. Most surprisingly, the proposal included a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement that would prevent either of us from discussing the details of our marriage or divorce publicly. "This is a complete reversal from his previous position," I observed, flipping through the pages. 3 weeks ago he was demanding half of my inheritance. Now he's essentially asking for just enough money to start over. Keep reading. The interesting part is in Section 7. I found Section 7 and immediately understood Rebecca's reaction. Buried in the legal language was a provision that would require me to withdraw the state bar complaints that had been filed in response to Caleb's professional misconduct allegations. Additionally, I would be required to provide a written statement that his challenges to the house purchase had been based on legitimate legal concerns rather than personal animus. He wants me to rehabilitate his professional reputation as part of the settlement. Exactly. Which suggests that his vindictive legal strategy has damaged his career prospects significantly. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. "I made some discreet inquiries after we received this proposal. Caleb has lost 3 potential clients in the past 2 weeks, and 2 current projects have been put on hold pending resolution of legal matters." I set down the settlement proposal and considered the implications. Caleb's public campaign against me had backfired spectacularly. Instead of damaging my reputation, it had exposed his own character flaws to the professional community that he needed for his livelihood. "What's our leverage position?" "Extremely strong. The trial is set for 3 weeks from now, and we have overwhelming evidence of his financial deception, infidelity, and intimidation tactics. If this goes to trial, he'll likely lose significant portions of the joint assets as punitive damages for his behavior. And the professional misconduct allegations against me, dead in the water. The state bar investigation found no evidence of wrongdoing, and several prominent attorneys have submitted character references on your behalf." Rebecca smiled grimly. Meanwhile, Caleb's behavior during the divorce proceedings has raised questions about his own professional judgment. I walked to Rebecca's office window and looked out at the city where I'd built my career, where I'd met and married Caleb, where I'd discovered his betrayal and fought back with every legal tool at my disposal. In 3 weeks, I could have a trial that would publicly vindicate me and potentially destroy what remained of Caleb's reputation. Or I could accept this settlement and move forward with my life on my own terms. "There's something else you should know," Rebecca said. "Sierra contacted my office yesterday. She wants to meet with you." I turned from the window. "What about?" She wouldn't say over the phone, but she sounded different, more mature, more resolved. My impression is that the past few weeks have been educational for her. An hour later, I was sitting across from Sierra in the same coffee shop where I'd first met with Jasper to discuss Caleb's erratic behavior. Sierra looked dramatically different from the frightened young woman who had appeared in my office a month ago. Her hair was pulled back in a professional style. She was wearing a business suit instead of trendy clothes, and there was a new gravity in her expression that suggested she'd been forced to grow up quickly. "Thank you for meeting with me," she said, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup as if she needed the warmth. "I know this is awkward, and I know I have no right to ask for your time. What did you want to discuss?" "I want to apologize, not just for the affair, although I am deeply sorry about that. I want to apologize for being naive enough to believe Caleb's version of your marriage, and for being selfish enough to think that my happiness was worth destroying someone else's life." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated remorse. What I saw instead was genuine shame and what appeared to be hard-won wisdom. "I appreciate the apology, Sierra, but you didn't ask to meet just to say you're sorry." "No, I didn't." She took a breath. "I want to make you an offer. I want to work for your legal aid project. Excuse me? The nonprofit you're creating in the house. I want to be part of it. Sierra leaned forward, her voice gaining strength. I have a master's degree in interior design. I have experience with legal documentation from my internship with you, and I understand what it's like to be manipulated by someone who's supposed to care about you. I sat back, genuinely surprised. Sierra, you're 24 years old. You have your whole career ahead of you. Why would you want to tie yourself to a project that's connected to this situation? Because I learned something important over the past few months. I learned that being mentored by someone with integrity is worth more than being spoiled by someone without it. She paused. And because I think I can help other young women avoid making the mistakes I made. What makes you think I would trust you with something this important to me? Honestly, I don't know if you should, but I'm hoping you'll give me the chance to prove that I've learned from this experience. Sierra pulled a folder from her purse. I've been researching legal aid organizations, studying their operational models, developing design concepts for spaces that feel welcoming rather than institutional. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were detailed sketches of office layouts, color schemes, and furniture arrangements that would transform the clinical feeling of a typical law office into something warm and supportive. The work was sophisticated, thoughtful, and demonstrated a genuine understanding of what the space needed to accomplish. These are impressive, I admitted, flipping through the designs. I know I can't undo what I participated in, but maybe I can use what I learned to help create something positive. Sierra's voice was steady now, confident in a way that was completely different from the image-conscious girl who had posted about her dream house on Instagram. I don't expect forgiveness, and I don't expect this to be easy, but I want to earn the right to be part of something that matters. I closed the folder and looked at Sierra, really looked at her for the first time since this whole situation began. What I saw was a young woman who had made mistakes, faced consequences, and emerged with a clearer understanding of her own values. It was exactly the kind of growth that I hoped the legal aid project would foster in other women. If I were to consider this, I said carefully, it would be as a paid employee, not as a favor or an act of charity. The work would be demanding, the cases would be emotionally difficult, and you'd be working directly with women who've been through experiences similar to ours. I understand. You'd also be working with me regularly, which means we'd have to find a way to move past the personal history between us. I'm prepared for that. I hope you are too. I thought about it for several minutes while Sierra waited patiently. The practical side of me knew that her design skills would be valuable for the project, and her personal experience with manipulation and deception could provide insights that would help other clients. The emotional side of me was curious about whether it was possible to transform an enemy into an ally, whether redemption was possible for someone who had participated in betrayal. I'll consider it, I said finally. But first, we need to get through the next few weeks. Caleb's settlement offer suggests he's ready to end this without a trial, but I haven't decided whether that's the best path forward. What would you need to make that decision? I looked at Sierra thoughtfully. I'd need to know that accepting a settlement wouldn't prevent me from helping other women in similar situations. And I'd need to know that the people who participated in Caleb's deception understand the full consequences of their choices. What kind of consequences? The kind that lead to genuine change, not just convenient apologies. Sierra nodded, slowly. What if I testified publicly about what really happened? Not just in court, but in a way that could help other women recognize the warning signs of manipulation? The suggestion was unexpected and intriguing. A public statement from Sierra about her experience could be more powerful than any legal victory, especially if it helped other young women avoid similar situations. That would be a significant step, I said. Are you prepared for the professional and personal consequences of going public? Yes, I think I am. As I drove home that evening, I found myself thinking about endings and beginnings, about justice and redemption, about the difference between revenge and healing. 3 months ago, I had been a woman whose life was being systematically dismantled by someone she trusted. Now I was sitting in a position of strength, with choices about how to move forward rather than just survival strategies. The settlement offer represented a clean ending, financial security, legal vindication, and the freedom to build something new without the continued drama of a public trial. But it also represented a missed opportunity to expose the full extent of Caleb's manipulation and potentially prevent other women from experiencing similar betrayals. Sierra's offer represented something more complicated: the possibility that people could change, that enemies could become allies, that the wreckage of a destroyed marriage could become the foundation for something larger and more meaningful. I thought about my grandmother, whose trust fund had made my independence possible, whose wisdom about protecting assets had proven prophetic. She had always said that the best revenge was building something better than what you lost. Maybe it was time to find out if the best justice was something even more transformative than revenge. 6 months later, I stood in what had once been the master bedroom of Caleb's dream house, watching Sierra facilitate a support group meeting for women navigating high-conflict divorces. The space that was meant to be a private sanctuary for my husband and his young girlfriend had been transformed into something far more powerful: a place where women found their voices, learned their rights, and discovered that they were not alone in their struggles. The most important thing to remember, Sierra was saying to the group of 8 women seated in a circle, is that manipulation often disguises itself as love. When someone tells you that controlling your finances is protection, that isolating you from friends is devotion, that questioning their behavior is betrayal, those aren't signs of a passionate relationship. They're warning signs of someone who sees you as property rather than a partner. I watched from the doorway as Sierra spoke with the kind of authority that could only come from lived experience. She had kept her promise about going public with her story, publishing a detailed account in Atlanta magazine about how she had been manipulated into participating in the destruction of my marriage. The article, titled "The Other Woman: How I Learned That Helping Someone Cheat Meant I Was Being Cheated Too," had generated significant discussion in Atlanta's professional community and beyond. More importantly, it had led to dozens of women reaching out to our legal aid organization, seeking help with their own situations. Some were wives who had discovered affairs, others were young women who recognized themselves in Sierra's story of being manipulated by older, more experienced men. All of them found resources, support, and legal guidance that they might not have accessed otherwise. Miss Wells, one of the group members, a woman named Jennifer whose husband had hidden assets during their separation, raised her hand. Could you talk about the difference between legal revenge and legal protection? I keep wondering if what I'm doing is vindictive or just smart. I entered the room and took the empty chair in the circle. This was a question I heard regularly, and it was one I'd spent considerable time thinking about during my own journey from betrayed wife to advocate for other women. The difference is in your motivation and your methods, I said. Legal protection focuses on securing your rights, preserving your assets, and ensuring fair treatment under the law. Legal revenge focuses on hurting the other person, regardless of whether it serves your long-term interests. But what if protecting yourself does hurt the other person? Asked another woman, whose husband had threatened to destroy her business if she filed for divorce. Then that's a consequence of their choices, not the goal of yours. When I bought the house that my ex-husband planned to purchase with his girlfriend, my primary motivation was protecting my financial independence. The fact that it disrupted his plans was a secondary effect. Do you ever regret not going to trial? Jennifer asked. I mean, you had evidence that could have really destroyed him publicly. I considered the question as I had many times over the past 6 months. The settlement had been finalized 3 weeks after my conversation with Sierra. Caleb had agreed to all my terms in exchange for my agreement not to pursue punitive damages at trial and to provide a neutral statement about his professional competence to any future clients who inquired about the divorce proceedings. Sometimes I wonder what a trial would have accomplished, I admitted. But then I look around this room, at the women we're helping, at the resources we've built with the energy I might have spent on continued litigation, and I realize that this is more meaningful than any courtroom victory could have been. The group meeting concluded with the women exchanging contact information and scheduling follow-up appointments with our staff attorneys. As they left, I noticed that Jennifer lingered, chatting with Sierra about strategies for documenting hidden assets. 6 months ago, Sierra had been planning a future based on lies and manipulation. Now she was helping other women navigate their way out of similar situations with practical advice and genuine empathy. After the last client left, Sierra and I walked through the converted house, checking on the various program areas we had established. The main living area had become a resource library and computer lab where women could research their legal options privately. The former dining room housed our paralegal services and document preparation area. The kitchen had been transformed into a comfortable consultation space where difficult conversations happened over coffee and tissues. The architects from the Thompson Group are coming next week to look at the addition, Sierra reported as we walked. If we expand into the back garden area, we could add 4 more consultation rooms and a proper conference facility for the legal clinics. I nodded, reviewing the growth we'd experienced in just 6 months. What had started as my personal refuge from Caleb's betrayal had evolved into a comprehensive resource center that served over 200 women annually. We provided legal services, financial planning assistance, counseling referrals, and support groups. Most importantly, we offered what I had needed most during my own crisis: the knowledge that intelligent, capable women could protect themselves and build better lives even in the face of devastating betrayal. Any word from Judge Hayes about the expansion funding? I asked. Her letter arrived yesterday. Sierra smiled as she handed me an envelope with the familiar letterhead of the Fulton County Superior Court. She's recommending us for the state legal aid grant, and she's agreed to serve on our advisory board. I opened the letter and read Judge Hayes' recommendation, which praised our innovative approach to combining legal services with emotional support and our demonstrated success in empowering women to navigate complex divorce proceedings with dignity and strategic intelligence. Her endorsement would carry significant weight with the grant committee and with potential donors who understood the value of preventive legal intervention. There's something else, Sierra said, pulling out another letter. This came addressed to you personally. The return address showed Caleb's new business location, a small office in a converted warehouse space in an up-and-coming area east of downtown. Since the divorce, he had rebuilt his architectural practice with a focus on sustainable design and affordable housing projects. According to Jasper, who still provided occasional updates, Caleb seemed to have found some measure of peace in work that served a social purpose rather than just his ego. I opened the letter carefully, unsure what to expect after 6 months of no contact. Naomi, it began, I know I have no right to contact you, and I understand if you choose not to respond to this letter. But I wanted you to know that I've been following the work you're doing with the Legal Aid Center, and I think it's remarkable. What you've built from the wreckage of our marriage is more impressive than anything I accomplished during the years we were together. I also wanted you to know that I understand now what I put you through, and I'm genuinely sorry. Not sorry that I got caught, or sorry that my plans didn't work out, but sorry that I was capable of treating someone who deserved better with such callous manipulation. You were right to protect yourself, and you were right to refuse to be a victim of my selfishness. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for anything from you. I just wanted you to know that watching what you've accomplished has taught me more about character and integrity than I learned in 20 years of trying to build a successful career. I hope that someday I'll be able to contribute something meaningful to the world, the way you're doing now. I hope you're happy, Naomi. You deserve to be. Caleb, I read the letter twice, then handed it to Sierra. As she read, I walked to the large windows that overlooked the garden where we planned to build the expansion. The view was still beautiful, rolling hills covered in Georgia pines, the kind of vista that inspired hope for the future, but now it represented something different than when Caleb and Sierra had first seen it. Now it represented possibility built on truth rather than fantasy constructed from lies. How do you feel about it? Sierra asked, returning the letter. Surprised, I said honestly, and maybe a little relieved. It's good to know that he understands what he did, even if it doesn't change anything. Do you think he's really changed? I considered the question as I watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I think people can change if they're willing to face the consequences of their choices and do the work of becoming better. Whether Caleb has done that work is something only he can know. What about me? Sierra asked quietly. Do you think I've changed? I looked at the young woman who had been my intern, my husband's girlfriend, and now my colleague in building something meaningful from the debris of betrayal. She was still only 25, but there was a depth in her eyes now that spoke of hard-won wisdom and genuine commitment to helping others. I think you've grown into someone your younger self would be proud to become, I said. And I think the women you're helping don't care about your past mistakes, they care about your present commitment to their futures. That evening, I drove home to the small house I had purchased near Emory University, a craftsman bungalow with a wraparound porch and a garden that I tended myself. It was nothing like the grand homes Caleb had dreamed of, but it was entirely mine, filled with furniture I had chosen and books I wanted to read and art that made me smile. As I sat on my porch with a glass of wine and a legal brief that needed reviewing, I thought about the journey that had brought me from that night 6 months ago when I discovered the divorce papers to this moment of quiet satisfaction. I had set out to protect myself from Caleb's manipulation and had ended up building something that protected hundreds of other women from similar betrayals. My phone buzzed with a text from Leona. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate the grand approval? I have champagne and stories about my latest dating disasters. I smiled and typed back, absolutely. We have a lot to celebrate. Another text. This one from Jasper. Family dinner Sunday? Mom is making her famous lasagna and she wants to thank you for what you did for Sierra. Also, she may have some choice words about Caleb's behavior, if you're interested in hearing them. I laughed out loud, remembering how terrified I had been of the Monroe family's judgment during the divorce proceedings. Now I was being invited to family dinner as the person who had helped rehabilitate their wayward son's former girlfriend into a productive member of society. I'll be there, I replied. As the stars appeared in the darkening sky, I reflected on my grandmother's advice about revenge being best served by building something better than what you had lost. She had been right, but only partially. The best response to betrayal wasn't revenge at all, it was transformation. Not just of yourself, but of the situation, the relationships, and the possibilities for everyone involved. I had lost a marriage built on lies and gained a purpose built on truth. I had lost a husband who saw me as an obstacle to his happiness, and gained hundreds of women who saw me as a guide to their independence. I had lost a house that represented someone else's dreams and gained a center that made other women's dreams possible. The house on Crestline Drive would never be the symbol of romantic success that Caleb and Sierra had envisioned. Instead, it had become something far more powerful, a place where women learned that they could rewrite their own stories, that they could refuse to be victims of other people's selfishness, and that they could build futures based on their own strength rather than someone else's promises. As I finished my wine and prepared to go inside, I realized that this was what victory actually looked like. Not the dramatic courtroom triumph I had once imagined, not the public humiliation of my enemies, but the quiet satisfaction of work that mattered, relationships built on truth, and a life constructed entirely on my own terms. Caleb had tried to steal my future. Instead, he had given me the motivation to build a better one than I had ever imagined possible. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.